Welcome, my friends, to the Bob and Brad podcast. My name is Mike Keenitz, and I'm a PT assistant. Today, I am interviewing RT Hill and Niraj Vora from the Stride Shop. Both are physical therapists, and they own a running clinic in Baton Rouge and New Orleans, Louisiana. So we are going to talk about different running injuries and how to work through them and different exercises you can try to fix these problems. So without further ado, here are the gentlemen from the Stride Shop. The first subject we're going to talk about is shin splints. So shin splints are a very common running injury, which can occur in the front or back of the shin bone. What approach do you guys use to treat this injury?
Yeah, shin splints are a challenge in a lot of ways. I think that we have to approach them with caution. A lot of what we learned, I think, as we treated more and more running athletes is that we probably didn't do a great job earlier in our careers of being aware of stress fractures. And so I think that just being on the radar is a big deal. And bone stress injuries are this huge spectrum of, starting with the least severe up all the way to the black line that you see that tells us there's a fracture. So, and all of them need to be treated with caution, especially the ones in high risk sites. So shin splints tend to be along the tibia, the shin bone in the front of your lower leg, either on the kind of outside or the inside. And so if we're able to first really dig into somebody's kind of subjective history. So are there any changes recently in the volume of their training, the intensity of their training, footwear, the surface that they're running on? Are they a newer runner? Do they have experience with running? All those things start to inform how we approach somebody who's telling us that they have shin pain before we even touch them. And then with that, we can start to develop a little bit clearer lens of, all right, this shin pain doesn't really have any mechanism in terms of their training that spiked or anything that changed. So it may be that we approach it a little bit differently. Whereas if somebody said, a lot of times, when COVID started, I just picked up running and I was up to 40 miles a week. And those, your radar kind of starts spinning and you are much more aware of something that may be more of a severe case. But shin splints are really painful and can be really kind of a nuisance. They don't tend to get better quickly. But the things we want to look at generally are people's feet to start. What is their callus pattern? Where do they tend to bear weight on their foot when they're out of their shoe? What their motion is at their big toe. If they don't have appropriate big toe motion, that can cause a lot of issues with how they load their foot. Then we talk about, do you have toe dexterity? So I think toe yoga has become kind of very popular in a lot of places, but can you take, your big toe and lift it up in isolation and then your other four toes and lift it up in isolation? And that's as simple as saying, can you make a fist and open your hand? Well, yeah, everybody can. As somebody who's taken thousands and thousands of steps on a run, we like to see that people have control of their foot to efficiently disperse loads. So if they can check those boxes, then we start to go up to kind of ankle mobility. We start to look at strength of the calf and the peroneal muscles. And obviously we want to poke and palpate where somebody's pain is. If it's kind of this diffuse pain that's, kind of the bottom half of the shin, it leads us more likely to believe that it is muscular in nature and shin splint related, versus if there's this focal tenderness over one spot, it may make us lean a little bit more towards there being something related to the bone. And when we talk about the lower leg, the kind of anterior cortex, so that very front part of your shin is a pretty high risk site because it doesn't heal well. And that doesn't have great vascularity in some portions. So we have to be really cautious when somebody says, yeah, I got these shin splints. It's been really bad. I've been able to train through them, but it's just getting worse and worse. So our ears perk up when we hear shin splints for sure.
How often is it actually a stress fracture? Do you have an estimate?
It'd be hard to put a number on it, but I'll say that It's probably more than I would suspect. I mean, looking back before we started treating runners exclusively, and I'll speak for myself, seeing endurance athletes, runners in the clinics, it just wasn't something that was on my radar. I didn't think that it was something that was very common. But when you get into this population, it's more common than we think, and I think it's missed a lot. And I think that people end up in that cycle that we see where people come to therapy for a couple of months and then go away, and then they're back a couple of months later. And I think those are situations where we're just missing something. So bone stress injuries are more common than we think, but they also, they tend, I'll say this very generally, tend to present with people that have that, like, things add up, something changed in their training. You can tell, like, they have poor sleep habits, or they have a very stressful job, or they've got young kids and they don't eat well, and all these things that contribute to more severe injuries. So it's really, really important that we dig in, not just like, what shoes are you wearing and how far do you run. We want to make sure we're digging deeper to give us clues to see what may contribute to some of those bony injuries.
So, go ahead, RT.
I was going to say, I'll hop in there for a second on this to kind of touch on what you said about, how often were we seeing this? I can tell you, same Niraj. Like, I feel like I missed a ton of these over the course of it all until I started, like, kind of looking for it specifically. And now I'm referring people out probably a few a month that I'll end up seeing that I'm suspecting it, to the point where I'm like, yeah, let's go ahead and make sure we get some imaging, because the way that you're treating that versus a muscular injury is entirely different, right? You're offloading that bone tissue if you're in a stress fracture type situation. And so now I've just become a whole lot more aware of that risk, because it is a continuum, right? We tend to think of that shin splints into a bone stress reaction into stress fracture type of thing. And when it comes to subjective things, I think there's those certain key things that again, make your ears kind of pop up, right? Young kid that all they do is run cross country, right? Never played any soccer, never played any kind of bounding or jumping sport or anything like that. That bone's just been stressed in one manner every day that they've ever gone out and do anything. And that puts them at a higher risk, right? That bone hasn't built that torsional kind of resiliency to be able to tolerate those kind of things that you get with, like, a soccer player or a basketball player or something like that. Eating habits, poor sleeping habits, stress at school, those kind of things. So I would say, for me personally, just the more like high school young kids that I've worked with, those are the ones that I pay not a little bit more. I pay a whole lot more attention to that population with it.
Would you say if someone is coming off of a stress fracture and they're healed up, it'd probably be beneficial for them to try running either in different footwear, wearing different shoes, like their normal shoes one day and then a new shoe the next day, just to get different types of feel on the feet, or maybe do like more off-road versus on-road just to get a variety?
Yeah, so then you get pretty deep into, like, bone loads and where somebody's, like, it may be different for somebody who's a heel striker versus a forefoot striker as to what footwear they might benefit from if they had a tibial stress injury or a fibular stress injury. And then speed is really important too. So I think the difference between somebody returned to running at close to 8 miles per hour versus closer to 6 miles per hour, the tibial bone loads decreased by about 50%. So you want to be aware that you're really clear in what return to running looks like for these people. The biggest risk factor for having a stress fracture is a previous history of stress fracture. And so you get deep into how long it takes to reform bone and osteoblasts and osteogenic exercises that kind of put you on the right track. But footwear is important. And so if somebody has been in something like a shoe that's minimalist and has a history of injuries, maybe you do have to start them in something that has a little bit of a higher drop and shifts loads a little bit away from the lower leg. But it's very individual as to how somebody is structurally how somebody runs, where their heel strike pattern is. Cadence is a big thing in running and running injuries. So when we talk about return to running off of bone stress injury, we have to consider lots of things. You mentioned like different footwear, and that's huge. Having somebody wear more than one type of shoe within a week, so those who wear more than one type of shoe, 2 or more, are at significantly decreased risk of injury. So even if you're healthy, it's probably a good idea to build some tolerance to different shoe and footwear types. We tend to see people who are like, I love this shoe. I bought 6 pair of it. So
Yeah.
because the model changes and I'm going to be screwed.
People are trying to search eBay to find the Gen 1 of a certain Brooks pair.
Yeah.
I say this because I had a guy like that earlier this week. It's like, yeah, I found 3 pair from some guy in Ohio. I bought all of them.
Yeah. And sometimes those people are okay. They never have a problem. But yes, I think that being tolerant of different stresses on your foot and lower leg and whole body in general are great. In terms of surface, I think it's also important to recognize that like running on a treadmill will increase the load at your lower leg and ankle versus getting outdoors. So somebody with an Achilles injury or shin splints, I'm probably not prescribing their return to run on a treadmill versus if the other option is flat outdoors on the sidewalk. So there are a lot of variables to consider.
Sure. Are there any recommendations for like just someone at home if they have shin splints, like exercises or stretches you guys would recommend?
I'll hop in there for a second. Niraj touched in at the very start of it, talking about like that foot control, right? That toe dexterity and that ability to manipulate the foot and having a sound, communication signal from the brain to the foot. And I'm going to give a plug to a tool that we use a lot, and it's called a Mobo board. Created by a guy named Jay DeSherry from here in New Orleans, but essentially it's similar to like if you've used a fitter board in the clinic that goes plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, or inversion, eversion. This puts it on an angle that strengthens into pronation, supination. And it has a hole cut out where your toes would go. So you have to anchor down with the great toe and you stabilize in that plane of motion, that control in pronation, supination. And so that is, man, I can't tell you how many of those that we've suggested to people, and we're incorporating in a ton of our, or at least I am incorporating into a ton of my treatment protocols that I have for people. I think that's one of the best things for it, because there's so many different varieties of different balance drills and things like that you can do on it. And you see those individuals that try to bypass the shorter muscles, bellies that are on the bottom of the foot. What they'll do is they'll claw with the flexor longus muscle group, and when you do that, it creates a more rigid midfoot, and so you hit with more force, and that force has to go somewhere, and a lot of times it's in the shin. So all that to say, this board I feel like helps to establish a good foot control along that great toe and the true foot supporting muscles on the bottom of the plantar surface of the foot. So that's kind of where I start a lot of those individuals at.
I've never seen a board like that.
Yeah.
Huh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Man, it's fantastic.
All right.
I wish we got some money for something like that. We don't.
You gotta work out an affiliate with them. Come on, guys.
Yeah, I should work out something.
Mobo, if
the
you
guys,
hear
the guys
this,
from New Orleans, we can talk about old, watering holes or something around here.
You guys want to mention your website and where people can find you on social media quick before we get too in depth here?
Sure. Our website is thestrideshop.com. We've got blogs and some free resources and a newsletter that we think is cool. And we've also got an online course called video series called Building a Resilient Runner that we think stuffs a ton of information into some 10-minute segments that can be helpful for runners of all abilities. And then social media, we are at the Stride Shop on Instagram and the Stride Shop on Facebook.